this percentage of people drank more, or this percentage of people lost their jobs, or whatever, and they just looked at statistics, what do you think might be missing if that's the only use of evidence, statistics, if the goal is to try to explain what it felt like to be in lockdown? What's another kind of evidence that they probably should use too? Things are emotions, what's that?
Pathos.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like what type of evidence. We're still here in logos, but what type of evidence? If they're describing what it felt like to be in lockdown, and so they say, okay, we're designing a study, what did it feel like to be in lockdown? Here's a bunch of statistics. Is there another kind of data they could also use in order to talk about what it felt like? What about interviews?
Oh.
Hearing from people, like that probably would be important for them to talk about what their experience is. When people talk about their experience, sure, a lot of pathos would probably be involved in those interviews, but if we're just describing what type of evidence, we're still kind of within logos talking about types of evidence, then yeah, we'd want to look at more than just statistics. So I point that out to say, when you see logos, it's not just a matter of identifying, oh look, there's data, that's logos. That's the first step. But the second step is this the appropriate type of evidence that supports the logic of the argument? And if not, what would be another type? And so we're still analyzing. We're still, being critical about what we see and thinking, is this the best way to do it? So make sure that you don't just get blinded by statistics and think, ooh, that's fancy, they did all this work, they crunched these numbers. That's great, but also there may be other ways of going about it that would have been a better logical structure for the argument they're making. So that's what we're trying to anticipate as well. We'll get into that a lot more as we get into research that we have in the database. We talk about what do we do once we look at a piece of research? How do we evaluate that? How do we analyze that? How do we look for potential, not mistakes per se, but missed opportunities, other types of evidence that might have been used, things like that. So we still have to be, critical of that. So yeah, all that's logos. The next one is pathos, which is emotion. Typical examples would be emotional language. So with that, we're looking at how someone is basically getting us to feel a certain way as we're reading based on how they dial up or down the language. So for example, if I said, he didn't call and I was mad, or he didn't call and I felt betrayed. That's a different, dialing up of the language, right? Mad versus feeling betrayed, right? And so we have to be aware of when people are trying to get us to feel a certain way, and how they're using the language to accomplish that. And so if you see a word as you're reading that you think, well, that's a little bit heightened, that's something you would take notice of. That's on purpose. They're trying to get you to respond by using that word instead of a different one that might be kind of a more, I was sad, I was annoyed, or I was enraged. Yeah, okay? Well, what is that word supposed to be making us feel? So we're paying attention to the language. Emotional examples. There are examples that people could give that just are innately emotional. So then something about a baby, something about someone in harm, someone about a family member dying, or something like that. There are examples that are just emotionally, laden for all of us, just as humans. And those would be things to pay attention to. Any use of the senses. The more someone describes what it felt like, what they saw, tasted, heard, whatever uses the senses, that helps us to kind of use our memory of when we've had a similar experience, and it helps us plug in a way that brings out our emotions. So that's something we pay attention to. And then anytime an essay uses an image, any kind of image automatically kind of resonates on a different level for us in addition to the text, because it brings up memories and things like that. So even if the image itself is not innately emotional, it still is accessing our experience in a different way. And so we can kind of point to that as use of pathos. So pathos is emotion, not just the expression of emotion, but how emotions are elicited from us, how they're trying to get us to feel. And that's the important question with this one. When you're identifying emotion, you don't want to just say, oh, look, this is an emotional word. That's good. But the next step is, how is it supposed to be making you feel? And why is the author trying to get you to feel that way right now, at this point in the essay? How does that benefit them as they're creating their argument? So we're always layering, not just identifying, but layering kind of a layer of analysis on top of all of this. Why are they doing it in this way? Ethos is credibility, and usually that's established through personal authority. So the last time I went to Jamaica, I had this experience, like personal authority. Other people's authority. President Biden says blah, blah, blah. Opposing views. Anytime you're willing to consider an opposing view, then it amplifies your credibility, because it shows that you're willing to be open-minded and you're willing to think about things in a more critical way. Citing your sources. When you cite your sources, you are demonstrating credibility. And so that's a way of enhancing your credibility. But there are things that you could see that could overlap. Like maybe you have a statistic that goes against your argument, right? So that would be logos that's being used to enhance your ethos, right? So you can have examples that do more than one thing, and it's okay to mention that. So don't get confused or frustrated when that happens. It's okay to say this works and this works both as logos and as ethos. But you can still focus on one aspect of it and focus on the impact in terms of ethos or something like that. But examples can definitely do more than one thing. Any questions about the rhetorical appeals? Okay, so they're called appeals because they're supposed to be appealing to your reader in these ways. So most documents, most types of communication have all of these, have some element of all of these, but what percentage of them they have depends on the writing situation. So that's the other triangle that we've been working with.